It was a late autumn evening, and I was hauling lumber through Nebraska on a small highway. The sun had just begun to set, casting the sky in deep shades of orange and red. The road was completely empty, the kind of stretch where you don't see another vehicle for miles. It was peaceful in a way, with only the rumble of my engine and the occasional rustling of wind to keep me company. I decided to pull over to the side of the road to take a quick break. I was ahead of schedule, and a quiet moment to eat the sandwich I'd picked up earlier sounded like a good idea. After parking, I pulled out my phone to call my wife, but there was no signal. That wasn't surprising. Out here, cell service was a luxury. So, I sent her a quick text instead, knowing it would go through once I hit a service area again. As I unwrapped my sandwich, I looked out the windshield. The fading daylight was quickly giving way to darkness. The tall, swaying grasses on either side of the road cast strange shadows under the dimming sky. Despite the stillness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a cold chill ran down my spine. I flipped on my headlights to reassure myself that there was nothing out there. The beams cut through the growing darkness, revealing the empty road ahead and the quiet, desolate surroundings. Nothing moved. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. Deciding I'd feel safer back on the road, I packed up my sandwich, started the engine, and merged back onto the highway. The eerie feeling stayed with me, but I chalked it up to being alone in such a remote place. No more than 2 minutes after I started driving, I heard the unmistakable click of the CB radio turning on. Static crackled through the speakers, followed by a voice. "Where are you going?" The voice was deep, calm, and unfamiliar. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed the microphone and replied, "Who is this?" Silence. I frowned, staring at the radio. It wasn't unusual to hear chatter on the CB, but this was different. The voice wasn't joking or casual. It was deliberate. And the fact that they didn't answer made it even more unsettling. I tried to shrug it off as a prank. Maybe another driver was bored and messing with me. But then, a minute later, the voice returned. "I can see you." My grip on the steering wheel tightened as my pulse quickened. "Who the hell is this?" I demanded, glancing at my mirrors. The highway was still empty. No headlights, no taillights, no signs of another vehicle. The only light came from my own beams cutting through the darkness. Again, silence. I told myself it was just some trucker with a powerful radio, maybe sitting at a nearby truck stop. But deep down, I knew that didn't explain how they claimed to see me. A few minutes later, the voice came back. This time, it rattled me to my core. "You're in a cherry red Mack truck, carrying lumber to the Bayside Freight Yard. Your license plate is 7G42N3. My blood ran cold. That was my truck, my cargo, and my license plate. My mind raced to find an explanation. Was someone following me? Had they seen me earlier at a rest stop? I checked my mirrors again, but the road was still completely empty. Whoever this was, they weren't behind me. My eyes darted to my phone on the dashboard. No signal. I couldn't call for help, and even if I could, how could I explain this to anyone? I grabbed the CB mic again. "If you're playing a prank, it's not funny. Who are you, and what do you want?" For a long moment, there was no response. Then, with a calm yet chilling tone, the voice replied, "Why are you running? You don't think you can escape me, do you?" I hadn't even realized I'd been speeding up. My foot had instinctively pressed harder on the gas, as if I could outrun whatever was happening. I forced myself to ease off the pedal and take a deep breath. Panic wouldn't help me. 20 minutes passed, and the voice didn't return. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, flanked by open fields and the occasional distant tree. My heart slowly began to settle, and I told myself it was over. But then the CB radio clicked on again, breaking the silence with a burst of static. "That was fun, wasn't it?" the voice said. "Until next time." The radio cut out, leaving only the low hum of my engine. As soon as I regained cell service, I called my boss and told her everything. She was just as baffled as I was. No one at the warehouse had the time or reason to mess with me like that, and the level of detail the voice had about my truck was too precise to be random. To this day, I don't know how that person got onto my frequency or how they knew so much about me. I've gone over every possibility: a hacker, a stalker, even some kind of paranormal encounter, but nothing makes sense. The only thing that keeps me calm is telling myself it had to be a prank. But every time I'm alone on a dark, empty highway, I can't help but glance at my CB radio, half expecting to hear that voice again. And if I do, I'm not sure what I'll do next. It was just after 5 o'clock in the morning when I started my shift. The early hours were my favorite time to drive. Most people were still asleep, which meant empty roads and a peaceful start to the day. The crisp morning air added a sense of calm that I always appreciated before the long hours ahead. I had just left the company yard and was cruising down a quiet side road, getting into the rhythm of the drive. The sun hadn't yet risen, and the road was bathed in a soft pre-dawn light. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary until I noticed another truck pulled off on the side of the road. The rig was older, and I didn't recognize it from the fleet at my company. Standing near the back of the trailer was a man, his figure silhouetted against the faint light. He was bent over slightly, staring at the ground as though he'd dropped something. Even though it wasn't uncommon to see trucks broken down or drivers dealing with cargo issues, something about this scene put me on edge. Still, truckers look out for each other. It's an unspoken rule of the road. So I slowed down, pulled over just ahead of him, and stepped out of my cab to offer assistance. The man straightened up when he saw me approaching. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and tired eyes. He wore a stained flannel shirt and jeans, giving off the impression of someone who'd been on the road for too long. He explained that his trailer had popped open while he was driving, and that he thought some of his cargo might have fallen out. "Did you see anything on the road back there?" he asked, his voice rough but polite. "No, I didn't," I replied, "but I can grab my flashlight and help you take a look." He nodded and muttered a quiet thanks. I pulled the small flashlight from my pocket and began scanning the edges of the road. The grass was tall and dewy, making it difficult to see much of anything. As I crouched down to examine something that caught the light, I felt a sudden, sharp pain in the back of my neck. Electricity shot through my body, and my muscles seized up. The flashlight slipped from my hand, and I crumpled to the ground, completely immobilized. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening, but before I could react, I felt myself being flipped over. The man's face hovered over mine, his expression calm but cold. He grabbed me by the arms and began dragging me toward his trailer. My body was still convulsing from the effects of the taser, leaving me powerless to resist. The metal floor of the trailer scraped against my boots as he hoisted me inside. By the time I was fully inside the trailer, I had regained a bit of strength. My mind was screaming at me to fight back, to do something before it was too late. Summoning every ounce of energy I had, I swung my fist at the man, aiming for his face. He ducked easily, like he'd been expecting it, and jabbed the taser into my ribs. A fresh surge of electricity coursed through me, and I collapsed onto the floor again, gasping for air. Darkness crept in at the edges of my vision as I heard the trailer doors slam shut, followed by the sound of a heavy lock clicking into place. When I came to, the truck was moving. The vibrations of the road rattled through the metal walls, and the faint hum of the engine filled the air. My body ached from the taser shocks, but I forced myself to sit up, leaning against the cold metal for support. Then it hit me, my phone. I reached into my pocket, praying the man hadn't taken it. To my relief, it was still there. My hands trembled as I unlocked it and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered almost immediately, and I tried to explain what had happened, though my voice was shaky and the road noise made it difficult to hear. "I was tossed and kidnapped," I said. "I'm locked in the back of a truck. It's moving." The dispatcher's tone shifted, becoming calm and deliberate. "Stay on the line with me. Do you know where you were when this happened?" I gave them the location as best as I could remember and described the truck. The dispatcher assured me that help was on the way, but that was little comfort as I sat helpless in the dark, the sound of the road rumbling beneath me. About 10 minutes later, the truck began to slow down. I could feel it turn onto a rougher road, the bumps jarring me against the trailer walls. My stomach twisted with fear. Wherever this man was taking me, it wasn't somewhere I wanted to go. I whispered into the phone, "He's stopping. What do I do?" "Stay calm," the dispatcher said. "Officers are close. Don't let him know you have the phone." The truck came to a full stop, and I quickly ended the call, shoving the phone back into my pocket. Footsteps echoed outside, growing louder as the man approached the back of the trailer. The lock clicked, and the doors swung open, flooding the trailer with blinding light. I squinted against the glare, my heart pounding. The man climbed partway into the trailer, holding the taser in one hand. I knew I only had seconds to act. As he stepped inside, I kicked out with all my strength, aiming for his head. My boot caught him in the side of the face, and he stumbled backward, dropping the taser. Wasting no time, I scrambled to my feet and jumped out of the trailer, sprinting toward the trees lining the road. "Get back here!" he shouted, his voice filled with rage. I didn't look back. My lungs burned as I ran, my boots slipping on the uneven ground. Once I was deep enough into the woods, I ducked behind a tree and pulled out my phone. My fingers fumbled as I called 911 again, whispering my location to the dispatcher. "Officers are just a couple of minutes away," they said. "Stay hidden." I peeked out from behind the tree, my heart hammering in my chest. The man was pacing near the truck, scanning the tree line. He was muttering to himself, though I couldn't make out the words. Those 2 minutes felt like an eternity. I stayed completely still, barely daring to breathe. Finally, the distant wail of sirens broke through the tension. The man froze, his head snapping toward the sound. Then, without a word, he climbed into the truck and sped off, leaving me alone in the woods. When the officers arrived, I stumbled out of the trees, waving them down. They found the truck abandoned a few miles up the road, but the driver was long gone. Despite an extensive search, he was never caught. To this day, I can't drive past a truck pulled over on the side of the road without a sense of dread creeping in. I used to believe that helping others on the road was part of the job, but now I'm not so sure. Sometimes, the people who need help the most are the ones you should avoid at all costs. It was my 4th year as a truck driver, and by that point, I thought I'd seen it all. Long nights, rough weather, mechanical issues, you name it. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. It's a memory that still sends chills down my spine whenever I think about it. The weather that day had been rough, with thick fog blanketing the road. It wasn't unusual for the time of year, but it made driving far more stressful. Visibility was terrible, and I kept my speed low, staying extra cautious in case I needed to stop suddenly. The highway was deserted, with no other vehicles in sight, which only added to the eerie atmosphere. As I approached a slight curve in the road, I suddenly had to slam on my brakes. A woman appeared out of nowhere, walking directly in the middle of the street. I gripped the wheel and screamed as my truck skidded to a stop, barely missing her. The rig came to a halt, and my heart was racing as I sat there, trying to catch my breath. I quickly threw the truck into park and jumped out, calling after her. "Hey, are you okay?" She didn't respond. Instead, she kept walking, her figure disappearing into the fog. Something about her behavior seemed off. Most people would be startled or frightened if a truck came that close to hitting them, but she hadn't even flinched. My concern outweighed my unease, so I started jogging after her, shouting again. "Miss Waite, are you hurt?" The fog was so thick that I lost sight of her within moments. I slowed to a stop, straining my ears for any sound of footsteps or movement. But there was nothing, just the muffled silence of the night. Feeling a growing sense of dread, I turned back toward my truck, deciding to call for help once I got to the cab. As I approached the vehicle, something caught my eye. The woman was now inside my truck, sitting in the driver's seat. My heart skipped a beat as I saw her rummaging around, as if she were looking for something. Her movements were frantic and uncoordinated, like she wasn't used to being in a rig. I climbed up to the cab and opened the door. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Are you all right?" She didn't answer. That's when I realized what she was doing. She was trying to start the truck. She hadn't noticed that the keys were already in the ignition. Before I could say anything else, I heard a voice from behind me. "Yeah, she's fine, but you won't be if you don't hand over the keys." I turned slowly and was immediately blinded by the beam of a flashlight shining directly in my face. Raising my hand to block the light, I could barely make out the figure of a man standing just a few feet away. He was tall and broad-shouldered, holding the flashlight in one hand and something heavy in the other. "Don't make this hard," he said, his tone calm but menacing. "Just give us the keys." I felt a surge of panic, but tried to stay composed. "They're already in the ignition," I said, motioning toward the truck. "Take it. Just leave me alone." The man smirked and stepped closer. "Smart choice," he said, before using the flashlight to shove me roughly to the side. I stumbled but stayed on my feet as he climbed into the cab, pushing the woman into the passenger seat. For a brief moment, I thought it was over, that they'd take the truck and leave me there. But as the engine roared to life, I saw the muzzle flash. 3 gunshots rang out from the driver's side window, shattering the silence of the night. The bullets whizzed past me, close enough that I could feel the air ripple as they passed. I dropped to the ground, instinctively covering my head. My ears rang from the sound, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I don't know if the man thought he hit me or if he just didn't care, but after firing the shots, he put the truck in gear and drove off, leaving me lying on the pavement. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, too terrified to move. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Finally, I gathered the courage to pull out my phone and call the police. My voice was shaky as I explained what had happened, that my truck had been stolen and the thieves had tried to shoot me. The dispatcher assured me that help was on the way and that I should stay where I was. As I waited for the authorities to arrive, I replayed the events over and over in my mind. The woman walking in the fog, her strange, emotionless demeanor, the man with the gun. It all felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare. I couldn't shake the feeling that I just narrowly escaped something far worse than theft. When the police arrived, I gave them a full report, describing the 2 suspects and the truck. They assured me they'd do everything they could to locate it, but I could tell by their tone that they weren't optimistic. Trucks like mine could be stripped for parts or abandoned in a matter of hours, making them almost impossible to track. My boss sent another driver to pick me up, and while he was relieved that I was unharmed, the stolen rig was a heavy loss for the company. Weeks passed without any news of the truck or the suspects, and eventually, the case went cold. To this day, I still wonder what the woman's role in all of this was. Was she part of the plan from the beginning, or was she another victim coerced into helping? I'll probably never know. But one thing's for sure. I'll never forget the way she walked through that fog, silent and unflinching, like a ghost stepping out of the shadows. Every time I drive through thick fog now, I can't help but grip the wheel a little tighter, my eyes scanning the road for anything out of the ordinary. And every time, I think about that night, the night I came face to face with the unknown and lived to tell the tale. Driving a truck at night is a unique experience. Quiet, often peaceful, but also unnerving. The darkness wraps around you, the road stretches endlessly ahead, and your only companions are the hum of the engine and the occasional passing headlights. Over the years, I've grown used to it. I've learned to stay alert, trust my instincts, and prepare for the unexpected. But nothing prepared me for the nightmare I experienced one night while driving a familiar route. I had picked up a shipment in Texas and was on my way to Arkansas. The drive was routine, a long stretch of highway, a few winding back roads, and plenty of time to think. It was nearly midnight, and I was focused on the road, my eyes flicking between the pavement ahead and the GPS mounted on my dashboard. Traffic was non-existent, and the only light came from my headlights cutting through the darkness. The night was calm, almost eerily so, until I noticed something up ahead, a strange shape in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was debris, maybe a blown-out tire or an animal carcass. I started to slow down, not wanting to risk running over whatever it was. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't debris at all. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the shapes. 2 people, lying side by side, stretched out across the entire width of the road. What the hell? I muttered under my breath. I hit the brakes, the truck groaning as it slowed to a stop. My heart was pounding as I sat there, staring at the figures. They weren't moving. For a moment, I wondered if I'd stumbled upon some kind of accident. Were they injured? Dead? The thought made my stomach turn. I parked the truck and turned on my hazards. Grabbing a flashlight from the glove compartment, I climbed down from the cab and approached the bodies cautiously. My boots crunched against the gravel shoulder as I made my way closer, the beam of the flashlight cutting through the dark. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking slightly. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Neither of them moved. I crouched down near the first person, a young man in his 20s, wearing jeans and a hoodie. His face was turned away, so I couldn't see his expression. I reached out to touch his shoulder, hoping to get some kind of response, but before I could, his hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. I yelped and stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. The man sat up abruptly, and before I could process what was happening, the second person, another young man, similarly dressed, sprang to his feet. They both loomed over me as I lay on the ground, stunned and terrified. "Hey man, relax," one of them said, his tone casual but laced with something sinister. "We just need a little help." What are you doing?" I stammered, trying to scramble to my feet. Before I could get up, I felt a sharp pain in the back of my neck. The world spun as I collapsed face first onto the pavement. My head throbbed, and my vision blurred as I tried to figure out what had just happened. I managed to roll onto my back, squinting up at the two men standing over me. They were joined by a third figure, a shorter man holding what looked like a crowbar. He must have been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Get his wallet," one of them said, his voice impatient. I felt hands rummaging through my pockets as I lay there, too dazed to resist. My mind was racing. Who were these people? What did they want? I wanted to fight back, to do something, but my body wasn't cooperating. The blow to my neck had left me disoriented and weak. "Keys, too," the shorter man barked. "And hurry up." My heart sank as I realized what they were after, my truck. Once they had my wallet and keys, they started moving toward the rig. The shorter man stayed behind, his eyes fixed on me like a predator watching its prey. He knelt down, his face inches from mine, and grinned. "You should have kept driving," he said softly. "This ain't your road." The words sent a chill through me, but I didn't have time to dwell on them. The sound of the truck's engine roaring to life snapped me out of my haze. My truck, my livelihood, was being stolen right in front of me. I couldn't let it happen. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I rolled onto my side and pushed myself up. My legs felt like jelly, but I managed to stand. The shorter man looked surprised, then angry. "Stay down," he growled, raising the crowbar. I didn't listen. Instead, I stumbled toward the truck, shouting, "Stop! Don't take it!" The man swung the crowbar, but I dodged clumsily, nearly losing my balance. I grabbed a rock from the side of the road and hurled it at the cab, hoping to distract the driver. It hit the side of the door with a loud clang, but it didn't stop them. The truck began to roll forward, the trailer creaking under the weight of its cargo. Desperation took over. I ran to the back of the trailer and grabbed onto the latch, pulling myself up. My hands slipped on the cold metal, but I held on, climbing onto the narrow ledge. The truck picked up speed, and the wind whipped against my face as I struggled to maintain my grip. Inside the cab, the driver and passenger were arguing. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their raised voices told me they hadn't noticed me yet. I used the moment to my advantage, swinging myself onto the catwalk between the cab and the trailer. My boots clanged against the metal as I crouched low, trying to stay out of sight. I spotted an emergency tire iron strapped to the side of the cab and grabbed it. My hands trembled as I gripped the tool, inching toward the driver's side door. This was my chance to take back control. With a deep breath, I swung the tire iron against the driver's window. The glass shattered, and the truck swerved as the driver let out a startled yell. The passenger reached for something, maybe a weapon, but I didn't give him the chance. I swung again, this time aiming for his hand, and heard him cry out in pain. The truck veered off the road, coming to a jolting stop in a ditch. I jumped down, landing awkwardly but uninjured. The driver and passenger scrambled out of the cab, their faces pale with shock. Before they could react, I raised the tire iron and shouted, "Get the hell away from my truck!" They hesitated, glancing at each other, then took off running into the darkness. I stood there, gasping for breath, as the reality of what had just happened sank in. I called the police as soon as I regained my composure. Officers arrived within 20 minutes, and I gave them a full report. The 3 men were never caught, and my truck sustained some damage from the incident, but I was lucky to get it back. To this day, I can't drive at night without thinking about those 2 figures lying in the road. It's a reminder that danger can come from anywhere, even the places you least expect, and sometimes the road you think you know so well can lead you straight into a nightmare. The summer heat hung heavy in the air as I drove through the flat, open roads of Louisiana. My destination was West Virginia, a route I had traveled many times before. The shipment was routine, the drive predictable, and I had planned my overnight stop at a rest area I'd used in the past. It was a quiet spot, usually empty late at night, which was exactly what I needed after a long day on the road. By the time I reached the rest stop, it was nearly midnight. The place was deserted, as expected, with only my truck parked under the faint glow of a single street lamp. I appreciated the silence. After parking, I locked the doors, drew the blackout curtains, and prepared for bed. I always made sure to secure the cab before settling in, a habit drilled into me after hearing countless horror stories from other truckers. That night, I didn't know I was about to live one of those stories myself. I fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's drive. But my rest was short-lived. A loud bang jolted me awake, the sound echoing through the empty lot. For a moment, I thought it was nothing. Maybe an animal knocking over a trash can or something falling from a nearby tree. But as I lay there, trying to shake off the grogginess, I heard it again. Bang. This time, I sat up, my heart pounding. I listened intently, straining to hear anything else. Then it came, a faint tapping, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone gently rapping their knuckles against the side of the cab. Tap, tap, tap. Goosebumps prickled my skin. My truck was the only one there, and the rest stop was isolated, surrounded by thick woods. No one should have been around. I glanced at the small clock mounted on the dashboard. 1:47 a.m., too late for anyone to just be wandering by. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just sat there, listening to the tapping, hoping it would stop. But it didn't. It grew louder, more insistent, as if whoever, or whatever, was outside wanted me to know they were there. Summoning my courage, I grabbed a flashlight and moved to the front of the cab. I peeked through the curtains on the driver's side, carefully pulling them back just enough to see outside. The beam of the street lamp illuminated the area around the truck, but there was nothing there. No movement, no sign of anyone. I shifted to the passenger side and repeated the process. Again, nothing. Confused and a little unnerved, I sat back down and tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Maybe I'd been dreaming, and the sound wasn't real. But just as I began to relax, the tapping started again, this time accompanied by something else. A scraping noise. It was faint at first, like nails dragging against metal, but it grew louder and more distinct. My stomach churned as I realized it was coming from the trailer. Someone, or something, was back there. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in the cab, to lock the doors and wait until morning. But my curiosity got the better of me. I couldn't just sit there, not knowing what was going on. I grabbed a tire iron from under the seat, unlocked the door, and stepped out into the humid night. The air was thick and heavy, and the only sound was the faint hum of the street lamp overhead. I walked around the side of the trailer, shining the flashlight along its length. My boots crunched against the gravel, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I reached the back of the trailer, I stopped. The padlock on the doors was still intact, and nothing seemed out of place. But as I moved the flashlight closer, I saw it. Long, jagged scratches etched into the metal. They weren't there when I'd started my trip. Something, or someone, had done this. The scratches formed no discernible pattern, but they were deep and deliberate, as if whatever had made them had taken its time. I scanned the area around the trailer, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The woods loomed just beyond the parking lot, their shadows stretching toward me like long, grasping fingers. The beam caught movement, just a flicker, but when I turned the light toward it, there was nothing there. My pulse quickened. I decided I'd seen enough. Whatever was out here, I didn't want to meet it. I hurried back to the cab, locking the door behind me and double-checking that the curtains were drawn. But as I sat there, gripping the tire iron and trying to calm my nerves, the noises started again. This time, it wasn't just tapping or scraping. It was footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the truck. I held my breath, straining to hear. The footsteps would pause, then start again, as if whoever was out there wanted me to know they weren't in a hurry. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest as the footsteps stopped right outside the driver's side door. The handle jiggled. I froze. The door was locked, but the thought of someone, or something, trying to get in sent a wave of terror through me. The handle jiggled again, harder this time, followed by a low, guttural sound, halfway between a growl and a laugh. "Go away," I shouted, my voice trembling. "I'm armed." The sound stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, the footsteps moved away, fading into the distance. I sat there for what felt like hours, gripping the tire iron and jumping at every creak and groan of the truck. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I must have dozed off. When I woke up, the sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the rest stop. The eerie atmosphere of the night was gone, replaced by the familiar sounds of morning birds and the distant hum of traffic. I stepped out of the truck, hesitant but determined to check for any signs of what had happened. The scratches on the trailer were still there, stark against the metal. I walked around the truck, my eyes scanning the ground for footprints or any other clues. That's when I saw them, deep impressions in the gravel, leading from the woods to the truck and back again. They weren't boot prints or anything human. They were long and narrow, with claw-like markings at the tips. I reported the incident to my boss and later to the authorities, but no one could explain what had happened. Some suggested it was a prank, others speculated about animals, but none of the explanations felt right. Whatever was out there that night, it wasn't human, and it wasn't friendly. To this day, I refuse to stop at that rest area. Every time I pass it on the highway, I feel a chill run down my spine. The scratches on the trailer and the memory of those sounds are burned into my mind, a constant reminder of how quickly a quiet night can turn into a nightmare. During my first year as a truck driver, I heard countless stories about the dangers of rest stops. Other drivers would talk about thefts, fights, and strange encounters late at night. At first, I dismissed them as tall tales meant to spook the new guy. But after what happened to me at a rest stop just outside of Syracuse, I realized that those stories were more than just rumors. That night, I learned how terrifyingly real they could be. It was late summer, and I was hauling a shipment of electronics across New York State. My route required several overnight stops, but I was prepared. I had my truck outfitted with blackout curtains, secure locks, and a personal alarm system. On top of that, I'd parked at this particular rest stop a few times before. It was well lit, surrounded by woods, and usually had several other trucks parked nearby. It felt safe, or at least as safe as a rest stop could feel. That night, the lot was unusually quiet. There were only a few other rigs parked near the far end, their cabins dark, indicating their drivers were already asleep. I pulled into a spot close to the restrooms, figuring it was a good place to park for the night. After finishing a quick meal on my portable hot plate, I double-checked the locks on my truck and trailer. Everything was secure, and I felt confident that my cargo would be safe until morning. I crawled into the small bed in the back of the cab, locked the doors, and closed the blackout curtains. Exhausted from the day's drive, I drifted off almost immediately. Sometime later, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. At first, I wasn't alarmed. Rest stops often had people coming and going at all hours, whether it was drivers stretching their legs or using the facilities. But as I listened, something felt off. The footsteps weren't moving past my truck. They were circling it. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. The sound of gravel crunching underfoot was faint but deliberate, growing louder as the person, or people, approached the driver's side door. My heart began to race. It wasn't unusual for someone to walk by a truck, but lingering like this, that wasn't normal. I reached for my flashlight and a tire iron I kept under the bed. The footsteps stopped, and for a few seconds, there was only silence. Then, I heard a faint, metallic creak, the unmistakable sound of someone trying to open the trailer doors. Adrenaline surged through me as I scrambled to the front of the cab. I flicked on the exterior floodlights, illuminating the rear of the trailer. In the glare, I saw 3 figures standing by the back of the truck. They froze for a moment, startled by the sudden light, then bolted toward the woods. Relief washed over me as I watched them disappear into the shadows. I waited a few minutes to make sure they were gone before stepping out to inspect the trailer. The locks were still in place, but someone had been tampering with them. The scratches around the keyhole made that clear. As I secured the locks again, I heard something rustling in the woods. My eyes darted toward the tree line, but I couldn't see anything. I told myself it was just animals and hurried back into the cab, locking the doors behind me. I sat in the driver's seat, trying to calm my nerves. My hands were still trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. I debated whether to leave the rest stop entirely, but exhaustion and the late hour convinced me to stay. I turned off the lights and moved back to the bed, keeping the tire iron within reach. Just as I was beginning to relax, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were faster, heavier, and closer. Before I could react, the truck shook violently as someone began pounding on the passenger side door. "Open up," a voice shouted. It was deep, gruff, and filled with anger. "We just want to talk." My blood turned to ice. I stayed silent, hoping they'd think the truck was empty and move on. But the pounding continued, more insistent now. A second voice joined the first. "We know you're in there. Come out, or we'll come in." My mind raced as I tried to think of what to do. The truck was locked, but I knew it wouldn't hold up if they were determined to get in. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher as I explained what was happening. "Stay on the line," the dispatcher said. "Officers are on their way. Just stay calm and don't engage with them." As I spoke, the pounding stopped. For a moment, I thought they had left, but then I heard something that made my stomach drop. The sound of glass shattering. They had broken the passenger side window. I lunged for the tire iron, my heart pounding as I heard one of them climb inside. The curtains separating the cab from the driver's seat rustled, and I braced myself. When the curtain was pulled back, I swung the tire iron as hard as I could. The man let out a yell as the iron connected with his arm, and he fell backward, cursing loudly. I didn't wait for him to recover. I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the ignition, praying the engine would start before the others reached me. As the engine roared to life, I heard them shouting outside. One of them tried to climb onto the side of the truck, but I slammed on the gas, jerking the vehicle forward. The man lost his grip and tumbled to the ground. In my rearview mirror, I saw the 3 of them scrambling to get out of the way as I sped out of the lot. I drove to the nearest gas station, my hands shaking the entire time. When I finally stopped, I locked the doors and waited for the police to arrive. They took my statement and searched the rest stop, but by the time they got there, the men were gone. The officers told me I was lucky. Rest stops were notorious for thefts and assaults, especially in remote areas. They advised me to avoid parking at isolated stops in the future and to always keep my doors locked and my defenses ready. I've followed that advice ever since. No matter how tired I am, I refuse to stop at rest areas unless they're well lit and busy. That night taught me a hard lesson about the dangers of the road. It also left me with a lingering sense of paranoia. Every time I hear a strange noise or feel the truck shake, I can't help but think back to those men and wonder what might have happened if I hadn't acted fast enough. The road is a dangerous place, and sometimes the scariest things out there aren't ghosts or legends. They're people.